Hey there, and welcome to the Fantasy Kingdom Spawner Pack by Procedural Worlds. The Fantasy Kingdom Spawner Pack is a Gaia biome and a bunch of genus spawners that makes it easy and fast to place Cinti assets into your scene. To use the Spawner Pack, you'll need POLYGON's Fantasy Kingdom, you'll need the Fantasy Kingdom Spawner Pack, you'll need Gaia Pro, and optionally you'll need Gaia Pro. Here I have a product that I set up before. I have installed Gaia Pro 2021, Gaia Pro, the Cinti Polygon Fantasy Kingdom, and the Fantasy Kingdom Spawner Pack. The first thing I'm going to do is create a terrain. I'm going to choose my Cinti Fantasy biome and create my world designer. The World Designer is a tool that comes with Gaia Pro that makes it super easy and fast to create cool looking environments. It's actually created quite a nice one for us off the bat, which we'll use because I quite like it, but you could actually randomize and keep randomizing until you get something you like. I'll just generate world. What Gaia's now doing is it's creating a terrain, it's adding in the textures, and it's going to run a texture spawn. Now, this step is completely optional. If you already have your own environment and you want to leverage the power of Gaia to add additional Cinti assets into your scene, then you can do that. And you can place them onto Unity terrain or onto mesh terrains. Okay. Guys, created our scene and textured it and showing us a preview of our water. I'll just go back to Gaia and add our run type. Again, this is an optional step. What we do is we automatically add skies, lighting, post effects, water, camera, and so on into your scene. You don't need to do this. This is completely optional, and you can also customize this, so you don't need to do all of it. Just note that I'm choosing the low poly version of our water. Okay, so we're just running a quick light bake, and I'll now pop that out of the road. So what Gaia's done is it's created us a basic environment within which to start to add Cinti assets. The workflow that I like to use is to create and texture my terrain with Gaia, then add assets with Gaia, and then optionally to finalize my scene with Gaia. So let's have a quick overview of what's in here. Inside of our Fantasy Kingdom, we've got our documentation, and the documentation has most of the standard sorts of workflows that you would actually go through when using the pack. Then we have our Gaia biome. We have some masks, we have a road profile, and then we have our genus spawners, and this is where you'll do most of your work. Inside of here, we've got spawners for battle. We've got spawners for dynamic buildings. Now, dynamic buildings are buildings where we procedurally generate the entire building. And every time you iterate, you get a new building. And these buildings have been set up so that you can enter them as well, and so you can fill them with your own content. Then we have fixed buildings. These spawners are buildings that are based on the optimized buildings provided by Cinti, and wherever possible we'll try and vary up what gets spawned so you can just iterate until you get the thing you want. Then we have a simple interior, the entire kingdom demo scene from Cinti all in one spawner. A bunch of spawners that are designed to be used with splines, but don't need to be used with splines. Some physics-based spawners, because physics in the editor is fun, and it's great for creating random piles of detritus and so on. Then a bunch of plant-based spawners. So we've divided these into prefab-based spawners and terrain tree-based spawners. These prefabs will work on Unity terrain and on mesh terrain, whereas the terrain tree ones will only work on Unity terrain. Then we've got a whole bunch of props. This makes it easy to place things into your scene. And then finally some rocks. Okay, so let's start by placing in a castle. So I'm going to go to my dynamic buildings and let's place our castle right in the middle of our scene on the top of this hill. I'm going to go a 5 by 5 by 2. I've just dragged that Gina spawner into the scene. First thing I want to do is just hit shift and left click. First time through, Gina will install the shaders for the visualization, and then shift and left click. And what you notice on this is if I hit shift and left click and drag, what we can see is a visualization, and if it's green it's good, and then there's a blue arrow that shows the direction in which I'll spawn this object. So I'll just hit control left click to spawn this castle into my scene. Now, while the spawner is still selected, I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and I. This is the iterate function, and what you can see happening here is we are regenerating a new castle every single time that we hit that button. So here we've got one. It's placed into the scene. If you look at this thing, this is modular, right? So if you were to do this manually, you would not only have to specifically place every object in just the right spot, but you'd also need to do things like flatten the terrain, and we've done that automatically for you as well. So now that we've placed our castle, let's add a wall, a set of castle walls. I'm going to drag and drop my wall spawner in here and just go up the top here, shift click and spawn. Now what's actually happened here is we've not only spawned, but we've also lifted and lowered the terrain as necessary. So we've created a nice flat base on which to do our spawn. Rather than taking you through all of the different spawners, I want to show just the main features of the system. Let's just quickly put in some houses. So not that one, let's put this one in. Again, shift click, angle it so it goes in the direction I want. Let's just pop that out to pivot. And control click. And again, just to show you a bit of the power of this, shift control I. So every time I iterate, I get a new house. And anything I've done with the dynamic building is generally usable. So if I go inside here, the interior is usable. So you can put whatever you want into this space. Same goes with our castle. So I can go inside my castle and go inside here into my interior, and I can head up the stairs and into my castle, or even just keep going up the stairs. Excuse my clumsy mouse usage here. And there we have lots and lots of castle to explore. Now let's talk about fixed buildings. Fixed buildings have come pre-configured with Cinti, and wherever we can, we provide options. So if they've provided options on that building, then every time you iterate when you spawn, we'll provide an option. Let's go and place a house. Aim it this way, copy it over here, Control Z, let's just maybe bring it this way a bit, and then iterate. So let's say we choose that one. Now all the normal Unity stuff still applies. So we've placed the building into your scene, you can do your usual editing and so on. You should look at Gina and Gaia and any procedural tool really as something that does the majority of the work, but it still doesn't do all of the work. You still have to do your magic on top of that, and that's what makes your game special. One of the interesting things about Gina is that it's designed to work hand in hand with Gaia, and Gaia has terrain and scene streaming built in. So what we do when we're spawning with Gina is we actually child all the objects underneath your terrain so that when we load the terrain, we also get everything that we've spawned on it. And then taking that a step further, Gina actually creates each of the instances of that spawn underneath the name of the spawner. So you can easily find all of the assets of a certain type in your scene. The next thing I want to do is show you how to add roads and paths into your scene with Gina. To do this, we're going to use the road system. So I'm going to go Gina, add road spline, and then I'm going to select pathfinding, enable it, and I'm going to disable existing roads. This means the pathfinding will find the path that has the least amount of gradient or slope, and that gets a really nice effect because it'll tend to follow your terrain. And then use existing nodes as when it's pathfinding, if it finds a shorter route, it'll actually join up the roads. In this case, I'm quite happy to be very much in control of my pathing. So let's go Control left click. You can see it's starting to follow the terrain and the path. And let's just finalize that down to say here. Now you'll notice that Gina has tried to follow the best path, but that's cut into our castle. That's not really what we want, so let's fix that. I'm just going to drag that over there, and I'm going to hit snap to terrain, snap to ground to fix that up. Now this is still a bit tight, so let's just move that over there. And you'll also note that this angle is wrong because I've moved things around. You can actually just smooth and that'll fix that up. And I might even just angle it in like that. The other thing I want to do is create a path over here in my terrain. So I'm going to select a node here and just zip that around. Okay, so now that we've got our basic path, we can hit it, snap to ground. We can probably simplify it and that'll remove unnecessary nodes. Let's just make sure it didn't mess that up. Yes, it did. So let's just fix that. There we go. Last thing I want to do is actually carve the terrain itself. So let's go into carve, turn on preview, and this will show you where it's going to cut the terrain. So green we're going to raise, purple we're going to cut. I think I'll make that a bit of a 2 meters instead, and hit carve. Now we've got a nicely conformed road in our environment. That'd be great if it was modern day, but we are in the medieval times, so let's change the actual materials we're using for our road. So I'll click on my road, and instead of using the Gina road profile, I'll choose Fantasy Muddy Road. And here we have a more stylized version of our road to go with this environment. The other thing I want to do is actually flatten this out. So I'm going to select my road and go use sloped cross section. And you can now see that it blends in. In future versions of the Gina system, we will add a better road shader. For now, we're just using existing standard road shaders. Okay, so we've added a road. Now let's add a path instead. So I'm going to add another spline. This time it's just going to be a spline. And I'm going to put a path along here. Just undo that. I might actually just turn on pathfinding, and because I just prefer the way that looks. There we go. We've got a path over to this road. I might drop that back and come over here. Select this, delete that. Select this, and oh, look, it's joined the road path for us automatically. This is this use existing nodes option I was telling you about. Okay. So created another path. Let's go and add one of our spline spawners. Now these spawners are designed to be used along splines. They can also be used standalone, and there's often quite good use cases for that. But for now, let's just add brick path. Gina will give you a visualization which will show where that spawner will be spawned, and it's based on this flow rate. So I'm just going to go spawn. Now you can see that Gina has placed these objects in the scene, but they're not aligned to my spline, so let's align them. And then let's conform to slope and can snap to ground. And boom, now we've got a nice path placed into our scene. So we've got roads and paths. Now let's do something else that's really cool with Gina. We're going to spawn some buildings along a spline. Let's place some market stalls along this little path here. So I'm going to go in Gina, add spline, and just click along this here. Quite a lot of markets here. And I'm going to drag in, I'm going to go to my buildings, and I'm going to grab my market stall and put this in, and maybe increase the flow rate a bit so they're further apart. And let's go bake. Oops, no, not bake, spawn. Yeah. We've just spawned in a bunch of market stalls, but you notice they're not facing the right direction. So now we're going to go align to spline, and then we're going to change the rotation until their rotation is correct. There you go. Now we make that -90. Now all of our markets are actually facing the road. And in fact, if you wanted to, you could grab the spline and move, whoops, and move them so that they're actually positioned even more closely to the road. Quite love this feature. It's very, very powerful. All right, so we've created a rather cool little marketplace along our path here. Let's place some more markets in the background here. And you can go nuts with this stuff, and I often do because it's fun. So let's go into our buildings here. So that was a store. Let's place some mixed markets back here. Notice this is a much bigger one. Aim that through there. Boop. And you get a random and different market each time, so you sort of need to join them up. And again, because it's positioned everything under a common root, we can actually move that around just to get that final bit of positioning just right. Okay, last thing I want to do, just to show off, to finish off showing off this power of splines, so I'm going to add a spiked fence around this encampment. So I'm going to add another spline. Go up a bit and look at what's going on around here. So we'll do that, and maybe we'll take this out to the road. And yeah, that'll do. Now notice I've actually placed this spine down the hill a little bit. That's okay. I did that deliberately just to show you how conforming to terrain would work. So I'm still in my, I'll go back to my miscellaneous spline, and I'll grab my spike wall, boom, and go spawn. It's placed lots and lots of spike walls along the environment. Now let's just hit align to spline, and we are done. We now have a rather cool spike wall sitting around our environment. Sometimes if you've got too much of a slope difference, you might want to just manually modify where that particular object is positioned. You can see all the different types of spawns I've done here. Cool, so we've added a bit of a protection for our fortress. Let's just add in some more stuff. So this is the props section of the asset. So we have put lots and lots of props here. Let's whack some barrels over here. Where have they gone? Barrels, B. put them up here against our castle wall. You notice that every time I spawn them, we get some different ones. If you don't like it, hit Control Z. Actually, or hit Control Shift I and just keep iterating until you get what you want. And then let's put some crates. Notice I didn't quite get the angle right there. Iterate, iterate. There you go. And crime and punishment. This was my idea of a joke. It's not very funny, but hey, there we go. Again, Control Shift I, and you can see how we're using the iterate function inside of Gina to add quite a bit of interest in these spawners. Let's put some benches, because yes, people apparently like to watch these things. Notice the benches are different. If you don't like the bench, actually I'll just undo that and just move it in a bit. Boom. And I'll hit Control Shift I until I get the bench I want. Let's go back to that same one. There we go. And I'll just move that slightly. Now, some of you might ask, well, why wouldn't I just do this all manually? You could. You could go and search through all the Cinti stuff, and you could choose the various different options. But Gina just made that a lot faster for you. Let's put a few more bits and pieces here. Maybe another platform here. Boom. And some cages to stick with the theme. Just iterating on that cage. The next thing I want to do to my scene is add in some cliffs and some rocks to add more of a natural sense to this environment. So I'm going to drag my cliff rocks in, and I'm just going to paint. I'm hitting Control and left click to paint them in. I can still iterate on this, so every single time I do it, I'll get something different. So you just keep iterating until you've got something you're happy with. It'll do. And then maybe I'll paint a bit in here. And same deal, Control Shift iterate. Every single time you do that, it's generating a new set of cliffs. Next thing I want to do is put in some large rocks. And let's go in and paint these large rocks in here. Create a quite natural look at the base of these cliffs. And then some small rocks. Zoom in a little bit more. So very quickly, you're creating quite a nice effect in your scene here. Okay, now let's add some trees to this scene. I could add them as prefabs or terrain trees. Now the next iteration of Flora, which will release in a few weeks, will allow you to turn these prefab trees into Flora trees, and you'll get up to 100 times increase in frame rate. So I prefer to use this because you get the power of a prefab, right? It's easy to move and easy to adapt. So let's just go and paint in some pines. Just click in here and just paint them in a bit. Just make it more of an organic and natural connector here between these two areas. I love this style of decorating your environment because you can be very artistic with it and get exactly what you're looking for. Let's add some interest out here. So the next thing is perhaps some sunflowers. I'll drag my sunflower spawner in here, and let's just put some sunflowers by the side of the road. Create a nice little bit of color here. Let's grab some white flowers. I quite love these white flowers. Paint a little patch of them here next to the tower, and in front of our area here. Maybe some purple flowers. I just love getting some color into these scenes. All right, so we've created some fences, we've created a castle, we've created roads and paths, we've added in a little area over here. There's a lot more inside of Gina that you can explore. I really wanted to show you the basics of it. The last thing I'm going to do is fill in the rest of my environment. I'm going to do it with Gaia Pro. So I'm going to go back to Gaia, to our tools, and I'll go to my fantasy biome, and I'm just going to hit spawn. Gaia is now going to retexture and go through the entire terrain again and add in a lot of extra information and a lot of extra bushes and trees and rocks and so on, and grass. Each of these spawners, you can turn them off if you don't want to spawn them. The other interesting thing about this is these have all been set up so that they avoid the roads and the castle and so on. So let's actually run this. We'll just wait for Unity to respond to us. Let's see how we went. Do that. So here we are, we've got our environment. And you can see culling there. I'm going to go and change that in a second so you can see the whole thing. So I've got some cool little rocks and trees and so on. I'm going to hit F11, and this brings up the photo mode in Gaia Pro. So let's increase our culling distance so we get everything. And I'm more interested here in beauty rather than frame rate, so don't worry about that too much. We increase our LOD bias so you see we get more of our stuff displaying. And yeah, we'll leave our terrain as is. Now let's play with our lighting. I'm going to drop the ambient intensity down a bit, maybe about 0.8. I'm going to override my sun. And let's change our pitch. I always love getting a bit of an angle in the sun so you get interesting times of day. You can change the direction of the sun. So now we've got a much more interesting scene. And maybe give it more of a very slighter sort of sunlight tinge later in the day. And I also like to bump up the light a bit. You know, everybody's different. I personally like it. We could change the fog and all sorts of things in this, but we'll leave that as is for now. And the next thing I want to do is just add in a depth of field. And of course, you don't need to do this, but I quite like the tilt shift effect, so I'm going to create one. Go high, change my near blur to say 4 meters and my far blur to 9 meters, and then change my distant blur from 400, bring that in. You can see how it's actually just starting to blur it there, and then bring the far in even a little bit further, and just make sure that reset when close is disabled. So let's go and see what we ended up with. What a nice little environment here. We've got some little roads. Everything's all nicely where it should be. And here's all our little buildings and so on that we added here. And, you know, we could even play a little bit more. Oh, over here we've got our little set of markets along the path. Those rocks in the background give it a little bit more interest. And if I go up into my castle here, the castle looks pretty cool here. I didn't do anything with the internal courtyard, but of course you could. There's a little area that I've created here. So I hope this gives you a sense of the power and speed of the Fantasy Kingdom Spawner Pack.